Шановні колеги, продовжуємо серію прес-брифінгів в Українському кризовому медіа-центрі. І зараз я запрошую до слова представників делегації партії Зелених з Німеччини. Ми будемо говорити з нашими шановними гостями про політику Німеччини щодо України і про позицію партії Зелених, яка є
to Ukraine and the position of the
speakers, our next guest, the delegates of Party of Greens from Germany, with Viola von Kramon, Peter Koller, Lino Mario Klevezat, and Mr. Oliver Christian Schufenegger. We will talk about the German policy towards Ukraine and the position of the Party of Greens. Without any further ado, you're welcome.
For having us here as a guest, as a delegation today. We are here for a couple of days in Ukraine, and most of us have been to Ukraine many times. But especially we as Greens, we are not just Greens, but we are also Alliance 90. So we are an alliance from the former Western Greens and the East German civil society movement. And that's maybe one of the reasons why especially our party has a special interest in Ukraine right now. Most of our party members, and you know Rebecca Harms, Marie-Louise Beck and Ralf Fuchs and others from the Green Party or from the Alliance 90, have come to Ukraine and stressed that the Maidan movement was always a movement for freedom, was always a movement for liberty. And we, with our roots in the human rights movement, in the movement for civil society, I would say we have seen that people have stood on the Maidan for months, for weeks, in the cold for their rights. And this is actually exactly what we wanted. We have seen how much Ukraine suffered under the Yanukovych regime. And we have seen how people really spontaneous went on November 21st on Maidan. And there was no CIA conspiracy theory. There was no foreign power behind that. There was just the people. And this is very similar to how the Green Party and how our party works in Germany. So we were always behind the activists, the journalists, the opposition leaders in the last years. I would like to stress that we really try to support also the new parliament. There is a different political power, I would say, that makes a difference. There is a qualitative new parliamentary composition, of course. But nevertheless, it is really important to see that they have a new pragmatic approach. I think many in Germany, many politicians are a bit tired of seeing the old faces, the old politicians with new reform approaches. So what I would suggest is really having like a block of interfractional group for reform, reform powers or reform movement. I give over now to my colleagues, and we can have questions later.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is the problem of the German public's view on Ukraine. I think here, when we're traveling through Ukraine, we are often confronted with the question: why is the German public so skeptical about Ukrainian policies? And first of all, I'd say it's not the whole of the German public that is skeptical. I mean, there are a lot of journalists who try to cover the events that have been unfolding here for the last 12 months or so, that are highly critical of Putin. But in the general population, we do have problems with let's say, a skeptical sentiment. And I think one reason for this is the legacy of German Entspannungspolitik that has been recepted in a reduced manner, let's say. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with German Entspannungspolitik, but that was something that was conducted by Willy Brandt, and the goal of this policy was to try to sort of improve relations both with the Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries despite of the Cold War. That was not overall a bad policy, but the problem is that in the German memory, it's all tied to getting to terms with Russia, which is, of course, not what this policy was all about. And we need to keep in mind that there are distinct societies outside of Russia that have also had their share of bad experiences with German occupation and the war in the past, just like Russia had. And so we're trying to raise awareness for the problems of Eastern European countries and try to get to terms with them and to help them to get into the European Union as long as they freely decide to join. Another problem, of course, is anti-Americanism, which is a sentiment that is present in the German public, both on the left and the right. And the Russian Kremlin propaganda sort of can kick in on that point, because if there's a anti-American sentiment that kind of tries to relate any threats to peace to American or Western policies and neglects, the actions Russia has taken. I mean, military action was clearly taken by Russia, not by anyone else. Then, if these Russian things are ignored, people focus on anti-American sentiment. A third problem I would like to focus on is lack of knowledge of Ukraine. Russia has a lot of funding for cultural policies. They have a cultural institute in Berlin. They even had a periodical newspaper called Russland heute, which was distributed with major German daily newspapers. And so Russia is very present in Berlin and beyond, while Ukraine doesn't have the resources and doesn't have a cultural policy like that, so it's almost absent from the public view. And I think it's difficult, but we have to change that.
Okay, one more welcome from me. My part is now to talk a little about concrete projects and what we can do together. And I think if we want to change the situation he has described, not knowledge, less empathy, we can't do it about writing texts. We have to bring people together. We have to need individual experiences between Germany and Ukraine. So this is the only way to makes the situation better and makes the knowledge better. And for this you need structures, and we don't have any of the structures. There are some twinnings in Germany between German cities and Ukrainian cities, but they are based on the old structures 20 years ago. So we have to find new project partners in these twinnings, and we have to found new twinnings. And this is one of the things I want to do with this delegation, to look which are the possible project partners for twinning projects in Ukraine. One example, I have invited a literate man from Ukraine, from Krakow, to Berlin in June, and in November there will be a theater group from Krakow. But it's very difficult to find these people from Berlin because you don't know where to search for them. In other international relations, Germany has this structure. So we have a German-Greek assembly. Well, both countries work together. We have a French or German-French and German-Polish youth structure. We have a youth foundation together with Russia, but we don't have any structure for this together with Ukraine. So we need both. We have to make the research for our own, every community, every village. On the other side, on the federal level, we have to think about such construction with helps. And this could be an activity for the new Ukrainian government to ask for such structure. Second point I want to say is something which I have learned in the last days here. I have learned that many of the journalists who write about Ukraine are not sitting in Kiev, but sitting from the German side, okay. Not sitting in Kiev, but have their offices in Moscow and fly in for a few days. And I think this could be correct 20 years ago, that could be correct perhaps 10 years ago, but in this situation now, even if they are very clear in their minds and know what propaganda is, this does something, this works. And I think we have to start a very direct discussion about some support for European media to build some structure in Kiev and not to do it from other countries anymore. This is difficult because this means state influences journalists, but there is no other way. We can't accept that the reports about Ukraine is coming from an office in Moscow anymore.
Yeah, hello as well from me. Yes, the Greens, it is not a real normal or kind of alternative party. The Greens has very strong ties towards the NGO scene. So I would like to talk about what we especially can do in Germany to improve the image of Ukraine. And there's some growing project in the moment. It is called Chata, Ukrainian word for house, of course, I think you know. That means the building of kind of Ukrainian culture house, Ukrainian center. So we are in the moment in the process of founding an association which is registered officially. We want to build up kind of grassroots organization, mainly self-organized, with a small bar, for example, with a room for exhibitions, where we can invite artists from Ukraine, painters from Ukraine, musicians from Ukraine, to provide Ukrainian food, just to create another image, because Russia does it. They have a huge cultural center in the middle of Berlin Friedrichstraße, a huge block from the 80s. Ukraine has nothing, and I think that's a pity, and that's what we want to do, to build up this Ukrainian house, not only for Ukrainians, but to meet Ukraine, to bring Ukrainians and Germans together, and to finish up with those really nonsense about the fascist junta, about the right sector. Many people believe this. I just need to call it Kashmar nonsense. And I think cultural exchange is the best way to finish up with this nonsense. And I just want you to know about these projects, and we will give you further informations about the proceeding of this project.
Thank you so much. I would like to say, and I would like to stress that your party, I mean the Party of Greens, constantly demonstrates support to Ukraine, and we have welcomed in Ukraine Crisis Media Center Ms. Rebecca Harms many times, who spoke very actively on what her party is doing in European Parliament. So really observed this constant support. So thank you so much for this. And let me start with the first question from my side. What is your feeling? What is your sentiment? What do people in Germany think about Ukraine? Because these days Ukraine is not more on the front lines of the European media, and our feeling is that the people really either forget about Ukraine, or they have some misleading information, or like, what's your observation? What's your sentiment?
Maybe I can start. No, I think it's a very mixed picture. You find people all over Germany who are very well informed and support Ukraine very, very strongly. But this is maybe not the loud minority who writes comments on Facebook and social media, and who sends letters to the editors of newspapers. This is a little bit, let's say, a biased picture. Yeah? But indeed, if you talk to people, and that's what my colleagues said too, the media in general, we have very good media, and we have very, let's say, differentiating media. But sometimes you really can see, and you can read, and you can hear the influence of the Kremlin. Yeah, there's sometimes like an original tone from the Kremlin in our public news, and this is of course extremely sad. I don't think that we can get, let's say, really an active pro-Ukrainian lobby in the German media, so the public takes another position, but more information, and that's one reason why we're here with the delegation, more broader information what Ukraine is all about. It's not just the conflict. Ukraine is a huge country, has a huge potential, has agriculture potential, cultural potential, human capital, and so on and so forth, yeah? Researchers and so. And they really bring this into the broad public will be interesting. But it is not that it's forgotten, and it's just negative, definitely not.
Thank you. We have one more question from here, from the room.
Hello, my name is Alexander Sheba. I'm with the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, and I would like to say how much we do appreciate you coming here, especially in this particular moment that is so important for Ukraine. Second of all, I have some experience with Germany. My first foreign assignment was first in Bonn and then in Berlin, and ever since I remember the Green Party being probably the most proactive and most unselfish in supporting Ukraine. So thank you so much, and to all of your camaraden also thank you a lot. I have a comment and a question. A comment about the lacking or underrepresentation of Ukraine in Germany, and that it causes some skewed picture of Ukraine in German public. I agree and disagree. I agree because this is the fact. I disagree because it's not so much because of Russland Heute magazine, or not because of the wonderful performance of the Russian media and Russian agents of influence. It's because of the fact that Russia and Germany have been living on this continent for many, many centuries, and Russia is simply well known. And what we have to do right now, not only explain what Ukraine is about, but also to explain how Ukraine is different, and that Ukraine has as much right for Germany's attention as Russia, although Ukraine is so unfamiliar. And the question is, as I understand, the most important and difficult problem for Ukraine in the dialogue with Germany is the interests, and very, very strong interests of German business with Russia, because German business has been so actively and so successfully working in Russia. And we have to explain to them why they have to basically, to curtail their business in Russia because of such things, and as European solidarity and so on and so forth. So maybe you have an advice, whether you agree or disagree, and whether you have some particular advice on that. Thank you.
Dieses? Das andere. Yeah. Well, thank you for your question. Yeah, I think, of course, Russia is well known and Ukraine is not, and that's, of course, because Ukraine hasn't been an independent country for so long. When you talk about business interests, of course, there is a huge percentage of imports in Germany from Russia. I think it's 3%.
No, the exports.
The exports to Russia is only 3%, so it's not a major market, but of course there are business interests. But I think one thing that can be done is if the new parliament engages on a way to decrease corruption and opens opportunities for investments in Ukraine, it can be also a very important business location for German entrepreneurs. I mean, we've seen that Poland is a very important market since it has joined the European Union, and I don't see a reason why Ukraine couldn't also be important or become important to German business.
Maybe to add one more fact, you see the sanctions are always dependent on the other member states. And it's always easy to say that it's the German business, it's the German business community who depends so heavily on the Russian imports or exports. But it's not, definitely not. And talking to, let's say, people from the German government, then you hear, well, there are other member states in the European Union who are much much more heavily dependent on the Russian economy, and who are really pushing everybody in the European Union. Either they are already bought in by the Kremlin, because a lot of money is going into several much weaker member states. Yeah? But of course, I mean, there are linkages, there are ties, this for no questions, but everybody is ready in the government, in the German government, to hold on to the sanctions until something had changed here in Ukraine, that's for sure. And even I know, nobody was happy to see that the 4 DAX leaders went to Moscow last week. Yeah? Cases like this are really miserable. No question about that. But this is not the majority of the German economy, not at all.
Thank you so much. We have.
I would put the practical part. One of the results of this trip now for us is that we will make a series of events in Berlin together with the Chamber of Commerce and Industrial, which brings together companies, institutions from Ukraine with Berlin companies. The Chamber had a very big. All the companies have to be members there, so they know them all. And we want to make a series of events with a bank. We have a meeting here with the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau to talk about Ukraine all in all, and then a special one about the energy sector. And the third one, we have just invited 2 directors of the Ukraine Bahn train system to Berlin, because Berlin is a big center of train system industries. We have production, we have all the other things, and much science in this case, and I think if they come to Berlin for 3 days with a good program, this could be really helpful. So it's again the point, we have to build networks between the companies, not on the big companies. This will not work such fast, but the small middle one in Berlin could be very interested in this, and if I see how much things are to do here in the infrastructure, then it could be a good job for them too.
We have one more question from the Radio of Liberty.
We have 2 more questions from Radio Liberty. My name is Bogdana Kostyuk, and I don't know whom exactly to ask, but the first question is, Germany is one of the first European countries who started to give support, medical support, for people being wounded at Maidan. Now Germany is doing its best to give rehabilitation and necessary medical support to Ukrainian soldiers wounded at the anti-terroristic operation. Is this theme, the heroes of Maidan in Germany, the heroes of Ukrainian army in Germany, is interesting for Ukrainian media? Does someone cover it? And the second question is, I got a choice to interview Mrs. Rebecca Harms, and she told me that it will be very useful if the Parliament of Germany, as well as the European Parliament, first of all, the Greens in Germany and in the European Parliament, are to help Ukraine with green technologies. During our elections happened yesterday, there are activists who understand very well that it's necessary to minimize influence of Russia in energetic sector. Do you think the Bundestag and the European Parliament, your party, will be ready to protect and to propose for Ukrainians so-named green technologies? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. Concerning the first question, to be honest, we are a post-heroine society. We are not used to face like heroes in fights. For us, it is a completely new situation. That's why I think we try to send and provide medical assistance, but really to present the victims of the conflict, the victims of the war in the German newspaper. It is another step. I think there were some documentation about the really tragedies and some stories, but of course it's definitely not a lot to raise the awareness of the German public. I think that the amount of soldiers we have invited to our hospitals was a big story here, because there were other people picked or selected than the Ukrainians expected. I talked to some people from the German Bundeswehr, from the military, why it was done, and they said, you know, we were very much unsure whether we could really do the worst case wounded or wie sagt man, verwundet? Wounded. Yeah. So they. Let's say they went for the the secure way, taking them where they could be sure they could do a rehabilitation in a period of time which is, let's say, handy, like 6 weeks. This is the truth. Concerning your second question, of course, I think everybody is ready to support Ukraine with green technology, absolutely. Not just the Bundestag, but also you need private investors. And what we have to do is really to promote Ukraine, that this here is a place where rule of law exists. This is one question also for the new parliament. Independence of justice. This is not really easy to receive. And so let's say the framework for investment, if this is done here, it will be easy to find investors from Germany to also give you the service, the knowledge to support you with new energy strategy, definitely.
Yeah, concerning the energy, it is true that there's a huge dependence from Russian gas. I think in Germany it's around 30% of the gas it's delivered by Gazprom. And I do not want to say, as the Greens, we had been right for 20 years. It might sound a bit arrogant, but I think in this case it is true, because the Greens said for a long, long time we need to decentralize the energy supply, and we need to build up renewable, sustainable energy. And if we continue that process, I think it might be the right way to get rid of Russian gas, rid of Russian energy. And I think this also might be a good way for Ukraine to build up alternative energy and wind energy, for example. I think it's no good idea to build up 20 new nuclear power stations. But I think there is a huge potential, for example, on the Black Sea with wind. You have wide, flat land for solar energy. And I think this might really be a big economic potential. And I think Ukraine really need to follow this way to get independent of Russian energy. And what I also want to add, there's a problem of the direct subvention of the gas price for the consumers, but not directly to consumers, but to Naftogaz, which is huge costs for Ukrainian state budget. I think it brings actually nothing. So there is the idea, we today in the morning met Roman Zinchenko, a real expert on this topic. Just to say it would be better to maybe subvention the energy, but not in the gas price, but in the isolation of the blocks of Soviet Union in Trayeshchina, for example, those huge blocks without any energetic very bad status of energy. And I think this might be a very good and I think very necessary idea, just to save energy, just to get independent from Russian gas and actually make it a bit more easy for Ukraine to survive.
Oh, thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? Then I have a question. Yesterday, Ukrainians made their choice in the early parliamentary elections. So I have a question to you. What will be your advice to the new, fresh government and the new, fresh parliament for their future work and reforms and everyday life?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for this question. I do think, well, as has been said before, the most urgent, I mean, of course, for Ukraine, the most urgent issue is dealing with the crisis in the east. And we do hope that the plan of President Poroshenko works out, that the situation can at least be stabilized, and then maybe on the long run, yeah, the control on the eastern territories can be gained back for Ukraine. But when it comes to the the image in Germany and the economic situation, I think engaging in a serious reform agenda is key in trying to reduce corruptions and trying to actually tackle the oligarchic structures Ukraine is still dealing with. I think we've seen that since the Maidan revolution, this has already been underway. But now with a new parliament in place, this can actually really be tackled in a more straightforward manner. And one thing I want to add is that I think that in the German public now also the lack of legitimacy that was sometimes perceived of the government actors of Ukraine to a large extent, that was of course not correct, I think, but this problem is now solved because we've seen that Ukraine has held completely democratic elections. There were no major incidents that actually posed a problem, and we have pro-democracy, pro-European actors, and this is a parliament that Germany and the German public, the German government can deal with.
Thank you so much. Колеги, якщо в нас немає запитань, thank you so much. We hosted here the delegates of the Party of Greens from Germany. Thank you for making it up to come here. Thanks a lot.